Hi, I would like to welcome you to Canada FASD Research Network's webinar on loss, grief, resilience, and FASD. My name is Dorothy Badry, and I'm the co-chair of the CanFASD Family Advisory Committee. We're a small group of 10 caregivers representing the 10 provinces and territories that form the research network. We have a dual role in the network of advising the network on priorities for research important to caregivers and individuals with FASD, and to assist in making research information available to those who need it most. In our role as an advisory committee, we have lots of opportunity to talk to people working with or living with FASD in our different jurisdictions. Stories of loss and expressions of grief are common. It doesn't seem to matter if we're talking to an individual with FASD, a caregiver, a service provider, or a professional in the area. Loss and grief is an integral part of many FASD stories. Sometimes those losses are very tangible, like the loss of a child through accidental or intentional death, or for some, the loss of their child through apprehension. Individuals with FASD talk about multiple losses they've experienced, like the loss of their family, the loss of friends, loss of school or employment. Service providers and professionals talk about the grief associated with recognizing individuals' needs and being unable to find the supports and services those individuals so desperately need. Sometimes, however, the loss they talk about is much less tangible, such as the loss and grief associated with feeling like you never fit in. Sadly, at times we hear about a loss of hope that things will change, and that supports and services will be available for individuals with FASD. What we find, though, is even though through these stories of loss and grief, one thing that comes across very, very strongly is the incredible resilience of all those people involved in the FASD story. The resilience of individuals with FASD so clearly demonstrate that FASD is something that they have, not who they are, and that they can succeed in spite of, maybe sometimes even because of the obstacles they faced throughout their life. We've seen the resilience of families and caregivers that continue to reach out and assist others by providing support, sharing their knowledge and their wisdom, even while they continue to support and advocate for their loved ones with FASD. The resilience of service providers that go to the wall for their clients and challenge the myth that FASD is untreatable. And let's not forget about the resilience of FASD researchers who continue to spend time and energy submitting funding applications for research, really important FASD research, when they know the likelihood of getting funding for that research is fairly small. So today in our webinar, we're going to be hearing from three absolutely amazing presenters. Dr. Dorothy Badry, who is the CanFASD Child Welfare Research Lead, Simon Laplante, who's a caregiver of an adult with FASD and a member of the Family Advisory Committee, and Myles Himmelreich, who is an individual with FASD and a well-known motivational speaker in the FASD community. They're going to be sharing their knowledge and experience with loss, grief, and most importantly, resilience, especially through these times of the global pandemic. I'm truly excited to be part of the discussion of this important topic. First, though, I'd like to take a few moments to talk about CanFASD. CanFASD Research Network is a not-for-profit organization that works towards all Canadians being engaged and united in awareness, evidence, and knowledge that effectively addresses the complexities of FASD. CanFASD supports and encourages applied FASD research, then strives to turn that evidence into resources and tools that support individuals, support policies, and support good practice. You can find out more about CanFASD at www.canfasd.ca. So now, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker. Dr. Dorothy Badry is the Child Welfare Research Lead with the CanFASD Research Network. She's a professor in the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Calgary. Her research interests and expertise primarily focus in FASD, from prevention to intervention, in child welfare, FASD-informed practice, child advocacy, child welfare issues for women with substance abuse issues, homelessness, and disability advocacy. She's the developer of the caregiver curriculum on FASD, which is currently being redeveloped for the CanFASD website. She's a co-author of the forthcoming 2020 Australian book, Decolonizing Justice for Aboriginal Youth with Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder, that has just gone to press. Dorothy is currently teaching summer sessions, and her 2 courses are FASD and social work practice. She co-teaches the course on loss and grief at the Faculty of Social Work and has invited all of her students to attend this session. The focus of her current funded research is stakeholder perspectives on suicide prevention and FASD. She's received funding from the Public Health Agency of Canada, First Nations and Inuit Health Branch, Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, and the CanFASD Research Network, and PolicyWise. She's been a member of the CanFASD Research Network Action Team on Prevention since 2008. Thank you, Dorothy, for joining us today.
Thank you. Greetings, everybody across Canada. I'm glad to hear some of my students are here. I'd just like to take a moment at the University of Calgary. I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy comprising the Siksika, Piikani, Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, Stoney Nakoda, Chiniki, Bearspaw, Wesley, and the Métis Nations in Calgary and surrounding region. So thank you, everybody, for being here today. It is an honor to be here with my colleagues at CanFASD and with all of you across Canada. So welcome to our presentation, and I just want to thank the Planning Committee, Audrey McFarlane, Kathy Unsworth, Tori Bailey, and Dorothy Reed, and my co-presenters, Simon Laplante and Myles Himmelreich, for being with us today. So let's talk about loss, grief, and resilience in relation to FASD. For everybody, it's really critical to have a life purpose. And sometimes for people with FASD, there are unique challenges that the rest of us don't face. And life is about living, and resiliency matters. So that's one of the threads that we want to certainly put before you. There's ups and downs. Loss and grief has a role in everybody's life. Loss and FASD go hand in hand. So do many other things, but it's a fairly unacknowledged experience. It is recognized, but it isn't always acknowledged. So it's important that we acknowledge it. And one way to do that is through this webinar. And how we respond to losses matters. It's really important to have supports in place, to be able to walk with somebody on their journey of loss, to be able to help them pick up the pieces again. And that's where we come to resiliency. So I did a little searching in the dictionary, and resiliency is about the ability to bounce back. And I, of course, selected the words that I thought were relevant, to recover, to pick back up again, to be flexible, and to keep going. These are all really important qualities in terms of many individuals with FASD that help them to carry on in the face of the most difficult circumstances and families. And the other point of resiliency is to be happy and successful again after something difficult or bad has happened. And that is often the experience of individuals with FASD. So, you know, there are many loss narratives, there are many grief narratives, but we also have to point out that there are success and resiliency narratives. This is absolutely essential. We also, in our research, Dr. Lenore Marcellus and I completed recently, talk about a life course perspective. And the early life history for a person with FASD is absolutely essential. And there are many individuals with FASD who have experienced involvement in the child welfare system. And as we know, children with disabilities, Indigenous children are overrepresented in the child welfare system. These all tie back to colonization. So there's many, many challenges for children and families with FASD, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But Elder, as a kind of philosopher and a writer, tells us that human development is embedded in the life course and historical time. its proper study challenges us to take all life stages into account through the generations, from infancy to the grandparents of old age. So I really believe firmly in a life course perspective on FASD, and that every decision we make from infancy to adulthood has huge implications in the life of a person with FASD. Who experiences loss and grief in relation to FASD? We've heard many narratives about mothers. We've heard stories about birth alerts in Canada. We've heard about the distress that causes to mothers to be. And in our CanFASD Prevention Network Action Team, under the leadership of Dr. Nancy Poole, we have a whole blog on girls, women, alcohol, and pregnancy. And many of those loss and resiliency narratives can be found in there. We've learned a lot from women who have given birth to children with FASD, and we really are trying to destigmatize that whole issue. So one mom said to me, she says, "Quit calling me a birth mother." She said, "I'm a maternal mother." And I really appreciated hearing that. So who's involved? Mothers, fathers, relatives. Children with FASD will experience loss and grief over their lifespan. And we have to be aware of that and plan for that. Siblings, the voice of siblings are really important. Caregivers, community members, professionals, others. And sorry, I forgot to put in a slide, but one of my students yesterday posted in our FASD course, and she knows I was going to talk about this, I have her permission, but she talked about her brother. She's got siblings with FASD, and talked about her brothers with FASD, and knew that when she was going out to her friends in adolescence, recognized that her brothers couldn't go out unsupervised, that when she got a driver's license, her brother couldn't get a driver's license, and that this was just the beginning of the many differences and things that she was aware she was able to do, but that her brother wasn't able to do. So that the experience of siblings in relation to loss and grief is really important. Caregivers, community members, professionals, and I'm sure there's others that you can think of. So what is loss? And what do common losses in FASD include? How comfortable are we in talking about loss and grief? What we do know, we hear loss and grief, we hear grief and loss. Well, what we know from loss and grief theory is that loss comes before grief. And grief is an experience emerging from a loss. We struggle dealing with loss and grief in our grief-denying Western culture. So how do you define loss? The act of losing possession, the harm resulting from loss or separation, an instance of losing. And we know, those of us who are very involved with people with FASD know that individuals have experienced many losses over their lifespan. And so I think one of our roles is to minimize those losses, is to help people grieve those losses, and is to help people move on to more experiences that mitigate those losses. And for a person with FASD, on a day-to-day level, being uncertain as to how to proceed, unable to produce what is needed, going into a state of distress. These are experiences, little experiences of loss that happen on a daily basis for people with FASD. The other experiences of loss can be detriments, disadvantages, deprivations, something that is lost, losing things like documents, papers, bus passes, you name it, forgetting things, accidental loss of those things, and even death. So these are some of the losses that we can relate to in relation to FASD. And what is grief? Grief is not just about death. I mean, it's easy for us to think about, grief in terms of somebody who has died and being aware of that experience. And we're going to talk a little bit about COVID-19, but losing loved ones and not being able to engage in the rituals that have typically held people through loss and grief is really an experience that many people are going through right now. And dictionary.com defines it as keen mental suffering or distress over affliction or loss, sharp sorrow, painful regret, a cause or occasion of keen distress or sorrow. And Merriam-Webster says it is a deep and poignant distress caused by or as if by bereavement or loss, a cause of suffering, a trouble. I've had enough grief for one day, might be another way to look at it. How do we deal with loss and grief? We build capacity and knowledge to respond to it. We have to know that no schedule exists for grief. And parents, I know the parents of the Family Advisory Council, and you're certainly going to hear from Simone. I know Myles very well. And, you know, we know that no schedule exists for grief. It's going to come out when it comes out. And there are no shoulds for grieving. And that's one of the things we talk to our students about. We should not make assumptions about the way others experience grief because it's unique to each person, and resilience and health affect grief responses. So if a person is in a really unhealthy space and continually has experiences of losses, that can contribute to unhealthy responses and even putting oneself at risk. So loss comes first and grief follows. There's loss of hopes and dreams. There's a general sense of sadness that can come with that, and a change in routines, which has certainly happened during COVID-19. So loss and grief are a well-worn path in FASD. Note I put an image with some bright colors because we know it's a tough journey. And parents experience these kind of things all the time. The implications that they're not a good parent due to the behavior of their child. Dan Dubofsky talks about this. It's the parent's fault the child is misbehaving. It's too easy to blame a parent, and that certainly contributes to the parent's experience of internalized loss and grief of those hopes and dreams. So really critical to not blame parents and to not blame the child. The child has a disability, right? FASD should not be about blaming, because that is one of the greatest losses that people with FASD and their families experience. And the expectation that you can do it all as a parent. We all know that's not true. And those who have had to stay home and put on those many hats of teacher and caregiver, as well as just being a parent, it's been tough during the COVID pandemic. In terms of the infant, child, adolescent, and adult who lives with FASD, there are many losses at each stage of life. Being involved in child protection can mean the ultimate loss of the parent-child bond. There's losses in friendships along the way. There's losses in school settings, in not being accepted by peers, and vulnerability to peers. Losses often in relation to positive adolescent and adult experiences, depending on what the environment is. We know that many children in their adolescence come into care, and we also know that many of those children are at risk, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute with some of the child advocate reports. FASD affects the life trajectory and potential, so that's another loss. So we did a review of, Dr. Lenore Marcellus and I and our research assistants did a review of all the national reports of child advocates in Canada from 2009 to 2019. And I'm just going to talk about the number of deaths. And what I will tell you about that is these are either accidental deaths or potentially suicide or engagement in high-risk behavior. So the column on the left, the reporting provinces are Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, British Columbia, and Alberta. And so the number of deaths reported in child advocate reports are the number on the left. So for example, in Ontario, there were 28 death reports that we reviewed. We reviewed 60 in total. And of those 28, we looked for evidence of FASD in all those reports. And we found that it was either suspected or in some cases diagnosed. So that in 98 reports in total, we discovered that 17, and I think we found one more, 18 are diagnosed or suspected FASD. So that's a pretty high number. This is the first time we are publicly reporting this. We've just started to share this information. And as well, there's cases of children with FASD or youth who have had serious injuries. So that research is forthcoming. And we just noted that there were 4 major themes that are critical, and this ties in with the care of children and youth with FASD, that early screening, diagnosis, and intervention are important, because without that diagnosis, Actually, a person and their family faces a lot of losses without having knowledge about what the disability is. The providing theoretically grounded care was our other theme. That is absolutely critical. The gold standard is to provide FASD informed care. And people with FASD experience tremendous loss from people who do not understand them or have an understanding of FASD. We need to have intersectoral collaboration, and we need to support parents and foster care providers and other caregivers. And we noted that the highest risk periods for death were ages, the early years, 1 to 3, and in adolescents, 13 to 17. And some of the challenges are mental health, substance use, developmental challenges, attachment disorder, ADHD. And in some of the reports, the common thread was that FASD was suspected but never diagnosed. And so we asked the critical question, how would an FASD assessment and diagnosis shape the care plan and thus life course possibilities for that child or youth? Important question. What are some of the emotions of loss and grief? Anxiety, fear, guilt, sadness, heaviness, the weight of it all. Weller says that grief is compressed, can be explosive, and how well do we recognize what is going on beneath the surface? It's easy to blame somebody when they're angry, but we really have to look at anger as an energy that is connected to lived experience, and it comes out in many ways. I'm not going to read all that, but just because I'm watching the time. And what did Dr. Gabor Mate say about loss and grief in the pandemic? We have never been so alone together, nor so together while being vulnerably alone. The novel coronavirus had already wrought the conditions for extraordinary collective trauma. The experience of genuine grief protects from trauma. We are all losing something, a sense of security, no matter how precarious, holds us in a world that appears familiar and in which we feel we know how to be, a sense of ourselves. It's really an important article at the time when the Nova Scotia shootings happened as well. And in the voice of a mother. This is from our CASA Photo Voice project, and I know that Victoria is going to be fanning out those links. I have a photo of masks I made, and I wanted to write a narrative about how tough it is to get young children to wear these masks to keep them safe. If they don't wear them, I don't feel comfortable taking them out anywhere. So they are so limited with their social contact at such a crucial time for their social development. Another loss, and how hard it is to get a little one to wear a mask. So for caregivers, there's sadness, providing endless support, being everything to your child when resources are not available, loss of the gains that the child may have had during therapies that were stopped. And as one mom says, actually I'll just flip, and for the person with FASD, sorry, I'm getting ahead. If there is some acting out, think about whether the person's behavior is linked to an experience of loss, such as change in the environment. Nothing is the same right now. Routine structure and consistency in lockdown are a challenge, and a lack of support's a major loss. So here's one mom from our CASA Photo Voice. CASA is Child, Family, and Adolescent Mental Health in Edmonton. Until you have a child or youth with mental health, it remains a faceless, nameless area of need in our community. For those of us who have lived experience and are navigating assessments, diagnosis, supportive strategy, and further referrals to agencies, this mass child represents thousands of children and youth who struggle to coexist, be successful, receive quality mental health care, not be bullied or ostracized, and to have critical options available during family crisis. And the same mom who had this black eye. And this is an important reality. The stress of the pandemic has been hard on everyone. And her child writes later, "I'm sorry for hitting you, yelling at you, and all my rude behaviors. Before you yell that I'm not sorry, really I am this time. I washed my hands upstairs so you can see that. I did. It's just really stressful with all the new rules for COVID, coronavirus, and my head is just everywhere right now with not going to school and washing my hands every 5 minutes. Anyway, I just wanted to say I'm going to try my best to listen and be way less physical towards anyone. I'm really sorry, Mom. So there's an interesting website called refugeandgrief.com that I've been looking at. And I actually get a daily thing. You can sign up and get a daily note from them. But the point is just listen, don't fix. Recognize you might not know how to handle someone's grief, but believe in them and show up for them. And I just want to, I'm close to the end, but I found this work by Dr. Francis Weller, and I find it an incredibly rich model for dealing with loss and grief in FASD. He talks about the 5 gates of grief. The first gate, everything we love, we will lose, the loss of others. This applies to everybody. Ultimately, we all experience, the death of parents, of loved ones. None of us are getting out of this life alive, right? We know this. The second gate, the places that have not known love. How were we raised? What was lost? The apprehension of a child at birth. And then the third gate, the sorrows of the world, troubles of today and yesterday, and we all know about that right now. The fourth gate I found really profound. What we expected and did not receive. When we are born and we pass through childhood, adolescence, and the stages of adulthood, we are designed to anticipate a certain quality of welcome, engagement, touch, and reflection. How do we even know we missed those experiences? A wave of recognition calls forth grief. What happens with all those experiences that were missed? An aching echo that often can't be identified. And we know that from hearing from many of our folks with FASD who have very much intimately shared these experiences. And the fifth gate, ancestral grief, the grief that is carried in the body and community from the sorrows of the ancestors. And there's a clear link to colonization and its continuing unfolding legacy. So what can you do? You can listen and hear the grief of others, active listening skills required, and that is different from listening, active listening. Grief is hard, painful work that no one can do for anyone else, but we can and must do this for ourselves, including constructing a belief system that can give us meaning and a safe context in which to facilitate our client's journey of loss and grief. That's taken from our course textbook on loss and grief by Hoyman and Kramer. A life with FASD is challenging, complex, but also a unique journey, one with ups and downs for everyone. There is hope, there is success, there is resilience. Look for those threads of hope and create something from there. And Dorothy tells me I have 1 minute, so I'm just going to take that 1 minute and just tell everybody how important it was for me to visit the loss and grief literature in relation to FASD. And I'm teaching a course right now on FASD and social work practice. And I'm also co-teaching a course with my colleague Amy on loss and grief that we co-teach every summer. And I talked with Audrey and others at CanFASD, and we've talked a lot about the importance of loss and grief. I also want to say how important our analysis of the child advocate reports across Canada has been. And we suspected that we would find evidence of FASD in those reports. One report where there was a request for an assessment of FASD was that of Tina Fontaine in Manitoba. Many will know about her. Her grandmother asked for an assessment. And these are all publicly available documents. So, and the other footnote is that the majority of the children that we reviewed in those reports were Indigenous, which ties in with the overrepresentation in care. So we have lots of work to do. But I'm just really honored to share this space today with my colleagues, with Myles, Simone, Dorothy, Audrey, Kathy, Tori. So I'd like to end here and we'll move on. Thank you very much.
The next panelist I'd like to introduce is Simon Laplante. Simone is the adoptive parent of a courageous young woman who struggles daily with FASD. He has a master's degree in education and did his thesis on the impact of children with FASD on parents' relationships with the school, the community, and each other. Simone has been working with the Manitoba public school system for 36 years as a teacher, vice principal, principal, and assistant superintendent. He's presently a school principal and is an associate professor at the Université de Saint-Boniface and the Faculty of Education. Simone's areas of interest are educational leadership, second language learning, Aboriginal education, and FASD. He's fully bilingual, and Simon has been involved in public speaking engagements with FASD for the past 10 years, both in educational settings and in provincial conferences. So thank you, Simone, for joining us today.
Oui, bonjour tout le monde. Welcome, everybody. Obviously, you can see that Simone should not have an E at the end. That would feminize me, and that's not a good feeling. But let's start going. I will address three things today in terms of loss and grief. I will talk about vulnerability of caregivers, social isolation, and life management of a child with FASD, or in my case, an adult with FASD. So in terms of vulnerability, as a caregivers, it's a huge loss in terms of being vulnerable to situation where that your child may, through emotional or physical, become physically or emotionally distressed. You can be very vulnerable in terms of your physical safety, your own safety. You are very vulnerable to accusations, confabulations. You know, your child will create story in their heads that they believe, which makes you sound like a monster or an abuser or somebody that cannot be trusted. And that creates a lot of stress on you and your couple. So I know many people I know who have taken children with FASD in their home have found themselves very quickly, in a matter of 2 months in one case, totally isolated from their children, their grandchildren, because nobody wanted to visit the grandparents because of the two child that they have taken into their home. So the safety issue, being accused also by your child, and how many times did my daughter call 911 on us for, you know, whatever reason. So that makes you very vulnerable, and that to me is a huge part of loss. And also being misunderstood by the people around you, not understanding what's going on in your life, not understanding your issue, makes you also very vulnerable. The second thing I want to talk about is social isolation. When you're taking care of children with FASD, you can become very quickly isolated from families and friends because people will judge you. They'll judge you as being ineffective as parents, although I believe my wife and I are very good parents. It's just that the behavior of our child at times was so extreme, and it was difficult for people to understand where it would come from. And the consequence of that is often that even in your own family, people start questioning, or people start hesitating to visit friends. We've lost many friends because they just couldn't accept the behavior of that their own children be witnessing the behavior of our daughter at times. Although, you know, she is a bright, wonderful young woman today. I mean, there is a social isolation is a huge loss for caregiver, because we thrive on relating with people and being with people. The third one I want to talk about is the whole issue of life management when our children become adults, because that requires a lot of attention and a lot of work for all aspects of their life. For example, and this is something certainly to keep in mind for caregivers, is that to start thinking early in your raising your child about what will be the housing arrangement when they get to be 18. Because if you don't think about that, I'll guarantee that's going to be grief and loss when they hit 18 and they have nowhere to live, or 19 or 20, unless you want to keep them at home. And all of that becomes a big issue in terms of managing helping them with life management, like doctor appointment, finance. I mean, we know that children with adults with FASD, you know, they have a hard time dealing with financial issues, housing issues, doctor appointment. You know, you make a doctor appointment for your child, the child doesn't feel like going that day, or is not ready to go, or just doesn't get up in the morning to go, so that you have to make another appointment. You know, food and health issues. Food, for example, in many children, adults with FASD, going grocery shopping is very difficult because of the noise and the smell and the color and the people in the store. It makes it really, so then who ends up doing the grocery for them and teaching them how to cook and safety around the kitchen and stuff. These are what I call life management, and it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of grief, a lot of your energy. So when thinking about that, my wife and I have been working with our daughter for 30 years. She's 30 years old. She is now, and in coping with those loss and grief, I think you have to learn to celebrate your child's strength. And our daughter has lots of strength. She's brilliant. She's very intelligent. She's bilingual. She started to work as an educational assistant in schools. And learn to have expectation for your child and for yourself, but not based on society standards, because they don't apply. You cannot you cannot test the ability of an elephant by asking him to climb a tree. It's impossible. So you got to have expectation for your children, but they have to be based on reachable standard and reachable goals that also have to be shared with the teachers and the people working around you with your child, and getting these professionals to understand their limitation, but then also the strength. And then also reach out to your community, like build a community of people around you. My wife and I have friends. If we go for a 1 week trip somewhere, I have friends who are on call 24/7, that my daughter can reach out if she's in trouble or things are happening or something breaks in her house. They will go there and help her with it. And so you got to, as caregivers with adults or children with FASD, you have to open up, you have to be honest, you have to talk to people about your challenges, and then build this community around you. And that's, to us, and for my wife and I, that has been the way we've dealt with loss and grief over the years. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you so much, Simone. Some excellent points you've made.
I hope so.
We're good. I'd like to introduce our next speaker now, Myles Himmelreich. Myles is a well-known motivational speaker successfully living with FASD. He's presented nationally and internationally for many years, sharing his experience of living with a disability. He's done a great deal of work as a consultant to many different agencies, organizations dealing with criminal justice system, teachers, support professionals, paraprofessionals, caregivers, doctors, and most importantly, parents and individuals with the disability themselves. Myles is also the co-lead of groundbreaking study on health and physical issues of adults living with FASD. His goal is to bring awareness, acceptance, and true understanding of living with a disability to his audiences. Thank you for joining us today, Myles.
Thank you. I got to get used to this mute button. I know my partner wishes she could just simply push a button. I be quiet. But thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this discussion today. I think we've had some really good points covering a lot of different areas. For myself, I want to kind of speak from the perspective of an individual with FASD. When we're talking about loss and grief and resiliency, it can look really different for a lot of people in many different ways. And I think we can all understand too that even if we have similar experiences, the way that we're affected and the way that we handle and take those experiences will be different, right? If someone in our family or a close relationship passes, the way that I would take it and handle it is going to be different than the way my brother or sister would take it or handle it, right? So when it comes to understanding loss and grief with FASD, what I think we need to do is kind of step back and look at what we mean by loss. And for myself, when I think about the experiences I've had in my life and I connect them with loss, I think it's the loss of opportunity and it's the loss of potential. That's something that people don't always seem to look at and understand is when you're an individual with FASD, there are going to be things that you're going to lose out of your control. Now, society has this expectation that you go to school, you go to certain grades at certain ages, you end up finishing school, maybe go to college, university, get married, have a career. And as Dorothy was saying, that life trajectory is there. And we all have this expectation that you're meant to meet these markers along the way. And if you don't meet those markers, then there's this kind of whispered conversation about how you're not being successful. You're not making it in life like everybody else. That is something that I think is very unfortunate because I have had many times as now that I'm older to be able to look back and go, I can understand and see things differently now. I sometimes wish I could go back to grade 7 because now I understand with my sensory issues how I could better focus. I understand with my ability to process differently, how I could take more time to present the things that I'm doing. I understand with my memory how I could do the work differently to be successful. But at that time, when I was in grade 7, 13, 14 years old, but developmentally, I was still a young child. Those expectations that were held on me were not achievable. And those are the things that led to loss. Those were the things that led to the loss of my education. And that wasn't fair because it certainly wasn't for lack of trying. I tried harder than anyone ever knew. You know, when people are looking at me going, you did it yesterday, why can't you do it today? And they're frustrated and tired. You don't know how often I looked in the mirror and said, you did this yesterday, why can't you do this today? Don't say you can't do it, Miles, because you did it. So why can't you do it? Try harder. All those labels and name tags people put on me, I was putting way more on myself, right? The lazy, that doesn't care, doesn't try, all of those things. And that led to the feelings of loss of my education. Then I moved into when I was a young adult. Here I was 17 out on the streets, no longer in school and involved in a world of addictions and neglect and abuse. The loss of potential to get and maintain a job was now huge because I couldn't do the steps, just like in school, you know, and I couldn't remember how to do those steps. So the same results happened in the sense that I now wasn't feeling a sense of success. This is the grief part. The grief part is where you don't feel that sense of success or self-worth. From my own experience, I can tell you how difficult it is to wake up and ask, you know, the Creator, why am I here? What is my purpose? I see people around me having families or going to work or school. They have a reason to get up. They have some purpose. I felt no sense of purpose and no self-worth because of the loss of potential. I didn't have the potential of having a great job and a career and success. That was taken away from me. I wasn't ready to be in those places at that time. I was chronologically 17, developmentally I was 12 or 13. But here I am supposed to act like an adult. When I turned 18, all of a sudden, Everything around me changed. All the expectations, all the laws, all the things I'm supposed to know how to do. Everything changed. But that's very abstract. It wasn't something I could see. All of a sudden I was supposed to know that I can't do this, and the punishments would change, right? And so these expectations of this is how to be an adult and how to be a successful adult, that again was another loss, because now I'm losing the sense of being successful because I'm constantly in trouble with the law. I'm constantly looked down upon because of my choices, right? So every step of that life trajectory that we all are on, I was failing. I was not meeting those markers. And so how do we go and do these things and say, you can still be successful? How do you still go do these things and say that I can find a sense of self-worth? For me, it was getting to a point of when I actually started to learn and understand my diagnoses. So what I always say is when I learned, understood, and made sense and became accepting of my diagnosis, I understood, learned, and became accepting of myself. Because now I could take those name tags and those labels and kind of peel them back and go, it wasn't that I wasn't listening. It's that I have sensory issues. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was maybe problems with memory or processing, whatever it was. To understand and go, so this is how my FASD plays a role for me. How can I still be successful, right? I may not meet those markers at the same times as everybody else, but I will meet those markers that bring me self-worth, bring me success. My self-worth is, feeling good about myself and being able to give back to this world. I believe the Creator has given me a gift that is not mine to keep, but for myself to share with others. My ability to have success in this world, I am successful. I've had the opportunity to travel around as a motivational speaker, a consultant, a researcher. I am a father of a beautiful young baby. I am married to a beautiful woman. I've met those milestones and I've done it in my time, and that's been my success. So understanding that success looks different for everybody. Success for me at one point, honestly, was sitting in my own basement suite, looking at my VHS videos on my 20-inch TV, going, this stuff's mine. I have my own place to sleep tonight. That's huge. And I was like 27, but it was my success, and it gave me my self-worth by understanding that loss and grief is something I had to understand, face, and deal with. You can be in loss and grief and you can feel those feelings. It's so important to understand that we can be there. We just don't have to live there. And that's what takes us from being a victim who suffers to being an individual who's resilient. Be there, just don't live there. And changing our view of what success is can help us move through the loss, grief, to resilience. Thank you for your time for listening, and thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Myles. It's always a delight to hear from you. I'm just aware of the time, and what I'd like to do is give each of the panelists a minute or so to make some final remarks, and then we'll close this session. I'm sorry that we haven't been able to get to all the questions, but if you have questions, you can always contact info@CanFASD, and we'll do our best to answer them. Dorothy, would you like to start?
Oh, sure. Thank you, everybody, for attending this webinar, and what a privilege to work with Myles and Simone and Dorothy in terms of this presentation. Loss and grief is a regular part of life, and the more we identify it, recognize it, and acknowledge it, the easier it becomes to cope with. And so, there's the little losses in every day that we talked about, but there's also the big losses. And so it is important to recognize that both are equally important, and that, we can't protect people from loss and grief, but we can place things in the environment that will keep them safe, and engage everybody around you as much as you can to to minimize those losses. Engage peers to support young people, to keep them safe, because I just wrote in one of the postings that, you know, young people are as vulnerable to positive influence as they are to negative influence. So get those, there was a term in an article once called success spies. Get those success spies to note that, to support the person, you know, put things in place that support hope and resilience, and that balances loss and grief. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. Simone, would you have some final comments?
We just reminding all caregiver and parents with children with FASD that you know, don't close the door, don't hide in your home, don't be ashamed. You are like, being able to raise a child with FASD is a huge challenge, but it also shows how capable you are as a parent. Advocate for your child, connect with people, get a network of people who are understanding and to support you. Work with the school. I know it will be frustrating at times, but for the most part, teachers, principal, they really care about the kids. So work with your school. Don't blame the school. Just work with the school and find advocate in your school, and things will go well. Knowing that you will lose some of those battles, and it's not gonna always go your way, and there'll be disappointment along the way. But that's life. C'est la vie.
C'est la vie. Thank you, Simone. Myles.
I think one of the biggest things that I would ask people to kind of take away from this is the discussion of FASD. We need to change that discussion in society. It's great if the people here, you know, such as Dorothy and Audrey and Simone and those that were involved in putting this together, have a conversation and go, yes, that's a great message, but our conversation and our messages need to meet and go out to Johnny, the guy that bags your groceries, to Sally, who brings your mail. It needs to be a social conversation when it comes to FASD. And how do we get to that point? Is moving past the shame and blame. When we get the correct information out there about FASD, we can feel okay to talk about it. When we have lack of information or wrong information, that's when we're scared, and that's what leads to shame and blame. As an individual with FASD, I can be as successful as somebody with autism. I can be as kind as somebody with Down syndrome. I can, you know, have these gifts and talents and success just like other people with disabilities. We talk about ADD, ADHD, and all these other ones because we're not afraid of them. We understand them. We don't talk about FASD because we're afraid of it.
Absolutely.
We start to need to get to a point where we understand it and have those discussions. And that starts today when someone goes, hey, how's it going? You can talk about being part of this webinar and the things that you learned. And when the person goes, oh, FASD, yeah, I know a kid like that, it's so terrible. You can help educate them and help them understand that success is different for everybody and that it's not this big, bad, terrible thing, right? As my parents always taught me, even in the word ability or disability is a word ability. So focus on that. Focus on the ability, not the disability, and that's what can lead to success. We have that conversation. We can start to make that change in society when it comes to FASD. So thank you.
Thank you, Myles. Well, on behalf of CanFASD Research Network, I'd like to thank you, Dorothy and Simone and Myles, for just doing such an excellent presentation. To the participants, I'd really like to thank each of you for joining us today. And Myles has given us our marching orders. It's important for us all to go out after this and to start to destigmatize FASD, to recognize that everybody that's involved with the FASD story has strengths and has resilience, and that needs to be advertised as much as the challenges need to be advertised. And so I think we've all been given our marching orders by Myles. Thank you very much.